Hey guys, this is here again for another album review. Today I am reviewing Wavves, Afraid of Heights. Wavves are a California-based noise rock outfit. They released an album a couple of years ago called King of the Beach, which was a really fun, energetic, quite simple noise rock album, and I really loved it. I think a lot of people really loved it. It had a lot of really short, just catchy, powerful, enjoyable songs, and yeah, it was very simple. But the short song lengths kind of negated that, so it was fine. And they've released a new album now called Afraid of Heights, which is probably aiming a little bit higher in terms of depth. It's a bit more mature, a bit more cynical, and very heavily influenced by Nirvana, obviously. And it kind of goes in a bit more of a grunge kind of sound, rather than their typical just lo-fi, energetic noise rock. I apologise in advance for drawing a lot of similarities to Nirvana, but as I said, like, this album is very heavily influenced by Nirvana, so I will be drawing some similarities to kind of convey what they sound like in parts. And somebody's vacuuming right now, flipping fabulous. I apologise about that, but I'm not going to wait for him to finish. Sail to the Sun is the opening track. It's a bit more of a typical Wavves track as opposed to their grunge kind of sound they go for on a lot of these tracks. Straight up, I noticed the production was better, I would say in inverted commas, because it was obvious that in the first album the lo-fi sound was obviously a deliberate thing, not just because they can't afford proper production. It had the same kind of fun approach that they went with on King of the Beach, though the lyrics were quite had a bit more mature themes, if that makes sense. Not really the most catchy song as I thought from them, as opposed to what they had on King of the Beach. Still catchy, and it's a great song on its own, but as an opener I thought it was a bit of a questionable choice, but it was still a great track. Demon to Lean On, this was a lot more grungy than the opener. It had a very similar feel to a lot of Nirvana tracks, just with that Wavves kind of sound to it. Very quite simple and juvenile, yet at the same time quite emotional. It feels like it had a lot of emotional power to it. It was catchy, but it dragged on a little bit too long, and I found myself getting a little annoyed by the towards the end. And I found that on a couple of these tracks on this album that it did feel a little bit that they dragged out too long. But I'll mention that on what tracks were affected by that. Mystic had the same kind of lo-fi approach that King of the Beach did. And the guitar melody sounded exactly like One Way or Another, Blondie. It was kind of odd, but it was quite a catchy short track. I really enjoyed that. Lounge Forward was one of my favourite tracks on the album, actually. It was a bit similar to the opener in terms of production. It was King of the Beach sounding, yet didn't have that kind of fuzzy feel to the actual instruments and the vocals. The lyrics were quite cynical, had a very cynical kind of approach, a very cynical feel to that, and a lot of the tracks on here did, and yeah. And I think that comes with the album trying to go a bit more of a mature theme to it. The sound in this track is kind of what I hoped for the whole album, as a more mature sounding version of Wavves. The next few tracks for me were a bit of a lull in the album. Dog, which was the next one especially, was quite, I really didn't get into this track. Had a really Nirvana feel to it again, but it actually kind of suffered the same sort of thing which some Nirvana tracks do for me, and it's just being overly simple. The lyrics were just a bit cringeworthy and repetitive, and it just went nowhere, and very juvenile yet not enjoyable in any way, really. The title track was not quite as bad. It was another really Nirvana feel to it, but it was catchy and enjoyable on its own, but it just went on a bit too long. This is one of those tracks that really needed to be shortened up. The chord progression especially was very basic on here, and it was okay, but with the length of the track it just kind of, yeah, it dragged on too long and I was losing interest quite quickly. It kind of finished off in like almost a second track to it. Had this really surfy psychedelic kind of, but it was quite slow paced and depressing. I quite enjoyed that bit. It was only a very short kind of segment on the end though. Paranoid had a bit of a lo-fi grunge feel to it. It had kind of the pacing of King of the Beach, like a lot of the songs on King of the Beach, like really upbeat, quick pacing, but it just didn't feel like it had the energy. It just kind of lolled around as opposed to what they a lot of the other tracks have, and that kind of yeah, it was a bit of a lull for me. But then it picked up back with KotB. It's kind of this short harmony driven track. It's kind of just like tells a story about how his friend kills a cop or something like that. It was a very short track. It was really enjoyable, had the energy that I desire in a Wavves track. Beat Me Up, another short, catchy Nirvana feel kind of track. As I said at the start, I'm sorry for comparing him so much to Nirvana, but it's obviously heavily influenced. But it's not so bad to the point where it feels like they're just trying to imitate Nirvana. They still have that same Wavves feel. They still have that lo-fi upbeat kind of feel to it, just with a bit of cynicism in it. And maybe it was the cynicism that's what it sounds more like, rather than I should probably stop comparing it to Nirvana instead. Yeah, it was a short, catchy track. I really enjoyed it. Everything Is My Fault was kind of a slower paced track. It was a psychedelic kind of, had quite a depressing feel to it, a lo-fi sound. It was kind of similar to the ending part of Afraid of Heights, that like little short segment on the end of that track, as I said. That's On Me was another grunge track. This one was a lot less Wavves than the other tracks. This one did feel like they were kind of going for a full-on Nirvana song. I think it was almost not recognisable at all from Wavves, maybe except from the sound of the vocals. Well, the song itself was really enjoyable. Gimme a Knife, another just great song, really catchy, enjoyable. This was another one of my favourite songs on the album. And I Can't Dream was another slow-paced kind of psychedelic finish to the album. It was really quite nice. It kind of progressed as it went along. It didn't feel repetitive. It was really quite solemn actually as a closer. So yeah, I quite enjoyed the majority of the tracks on the album. There was a few in there which were, as I said, a little bit too repetitive or simple, but for the most part it really was just a step up in terms of depth, I guess you could say, to the King of the Beach. So I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. I think for yeah, as I said, it aimed higher than King of the Beach, and I think for the most part it pulled it off. There was a few songs on there that were a bit too repetitive and they couldn't really get away with it on this album, whereas they could have on King of the Beach. It had a lot of energy, a lot of great catchy songs as you would expect, but yeah, as I said, just with that, a bit more maturity, a bit more depth to the lyrical themes and that sort of stuff. And yeah, as I said, it was heavily influenced by Nirvana, but they had their own sound. They didn't just imitate, which was good. If they had imitated, I think that would have really hurt the album, but they didn't at all, and it was good. I think I just basically said everything I want to. Join me next time when I review KotB's new album. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I'm going to just fail the pronunciation on all of their tracks, but what can I do? Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.